and they just see Americans as imperialists. So I arrived there. On the flight, they had the North Korean Olympic team, and that was really cool. So when I land, there's all these children with flowers and such like that, with the trophies that the North Koreans had.
Wow.
And that was cool. So that was the first experience in the airport.
Wait, so they had one representative from each Olympic team out, or?
Well, they had their whole team, the whole North Korean team that was competing in the Olympics during the summer.
For which category though?
Across the board, their entire
Seriously?
North Korean team was on my flight.
Seriously?
Yeah.
And that was all to impress the tourists?
No, it had nothing to do
Or
with tourists.
oh, it was just coincidence.
It was a coincidence
Oh,
that
okay.
when I was in Beijing, the entire North Korean team was not competing, but they were practicing in China because China very much supports the North. So their entire team was there. So that was really cool, being on a flight with North Koreans that have the Olympic team jackets and everything shows for the 2016 Rio Olympics that was happening during the summer in Brazil. So when I land, that was kind of a shock. You see 70 kids in the airport for these North Korean Olympic team to show their respect. So I got through immigration. They checked my computer, seeing if I had any propaganda to bring in, and then from there, my minder, who is a really nice a gentleman who is the secret police. They call them minders, and the tour guide, who is this phenomenal woman. They both spoke English and both were North Korean. They brought me to the bus, and we were on the way to the train station. And when we got to the train station, it was right next to the city center. And at that point, we were waiting for our tour, the rest of the 19 Europeans who were part of the tour. So once the 19 Europeans came on, we were on route to the hotel. But one of the fundamental aspects that really made me feel like I was in North Korea was one of the things the tour guide had mentioned is that if you make a mistake and you're in North Korea, then you're just gonna be kicked out of the country if you're European.
What constitutes a mistake?
Well, I mean, if you show disrespect.
Disrespect.
Yeah, like for instance, if we had a picture of Kim Jong Il on the wall, or Kim Il Sung, the founder of North Korea, then you gotta show respect with your palm. If you point at that photo, that's showing disrespect.
Oh shit! And that's how you end up in a concentration camp.
That's
disappear from the surface of the earth.
Well, I mean, that's part of the custom. You gotta show respect. But one thing is that if you're European, they'll kick you out. If you're American, they'll detain you, and that's one thing that she had said.
Oh really?
And she didn't say detain. What she said is you'll have to pay for your mistake. You'll have to pay for the disrespect. And I immediately raised my hand. I was just joking around. I was like, that is directed at the American in the back. And she was like, yes, it is. And from there, it was pretty interesting. I mean, the North Koreans have humor. You just have to learn about how you say certain things. I was very smart of what I said politically because I didn't want to cause any challenges with them by asking certain things such as like, what do you think of Kim Jong-un? That's not something I would ask. But you definitely understand that their people is focused on the regime. They show a lot of respect because unfortunately, if you don't show respect, you're gonna go to a political camp. That's just the reality of it.
Did you ever try to steal any ornaments as a souvenir?
No, I did not. I was a little smart about that. One thing though is that during our orientation of the hotel, they specifically said you can't go to the 5th floor. It's like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. You can't go to the 3rd floor corridor.
There's just one floor?
The 5th floor you can't go to, and when you look at the elevator, there is no 5th floor.
Oh my god,
it turns out that the only way to get to the 5th floor is to go to the 4th or the 6th and take a staircase down or up to the 5th. And that's where all the security cameras are, that's where all the propaganda are for the North Koreans to say that the tourists are, the Americans are still imperialists and don't believe what you hear. So the only places that we could go in the hotel was the 1st and 2nd floor, which the elevator only went to the 2nd floor, and then the 38th and 39th floor, which is where we were staying, and I was on the 38th floor. But that was just one thing that they explicitly said. And when you're looking at the American that was detained, he was detained because he went to the 5th floor on New Year's Day. And all of us knew that, and we had heard the story of what had happened. So it was kind of surreal when we're looking at the elevator after getting the orientation. We're like, oh wow, there's no 5th floor. This is really fascinating. But yeah, there's a...
Alright, so you come back from North Korea, you had that experience, and then somehow, somewhere along the line, you decide, okay, I'm gonna go for a world record. Fuck just North Korea, I'm gonna go everywhere. What was the line of thinking there?
Well, the spark happened on the first night in North Korea. We were sitting at a table, and next to me was a woman who her mom was the ambassador to Syria from the Czech Republic, and we were starting to talk about traveling and such like that, and I had mentioned that I had interest in going to Afghanistan, and because I've always wanted to see the seven stands. Afghanistan is one of the seven. And John, who's from Manchester in England, who was sitting across from me, he heard that and he was like, "What do you want to do? Go to every country in the world?" And I never had thought of that. And I played it off like, absolutely not. I honestly never thought. And 3 days later, when I was on a flight to Beijing and landed, and when I went to my hotel, I went on Google, and in Beijing, they censor Google. But I had the opportunity to get to 3 different sites before the censorship hit in. And the third site I went to, there was a gentleman his name's James, he's from London. He's now a banker, and he had just broken the world record for going to every country in the world as the youngest.
What is that record right now, as it stands?
24 and a half. And before that, it was 39. So he had beaten it by, 15 years.
How old are you right now?
And I'm 23. So at that point, I was 22, and I had 2 years as of May to go to beat his record. So on the 10-hour flight back from Beijing on United to San Francisco, I said, you know what, I'm going to try to do it. And I made a goal to myself, a pledge that if I got to 100 countries, I'm going to find a way to do it. And I hit 100 in November in a Caribbean country called Antigua and Barbuda. And from there, it was nonstop to figure out how I could go to the rest of the world, and that's where I am today at country 114, the sovereign nations of the world.
114 countries.
Yeah.
Wow. So you started in Sweden, if I'm not mistaken. Then you took a cruise to St. Petersburg from there, or?
So in the cruise, so the only way to get into Russia in St. Petersburg, visa-free, is the St. Peter's line, and it's kind of a loophole. It's kind of the same thing. If you go to Beijing, you can get a 72-hour pass, visa-free, to go into Beijing.
Huh.
So I had found this online. So yeah, I jumped on a cruise and went from Sweden, from Stockholm, the capital, to Helsinki in Finland, to Estonia, Tallinn, and then went to St. Petersburg. And that was incredible, going into Russia and seeing this magnificent city. I mean, it's an incredible city. And then went back to Helsinki, and then from Helsinki I went to Belarus and Belarusia, and then from there went to the Caucasus, Armenia, Georgia, Azerbaijan. But that was all in August, and in May, when I initially went into Europe, it was via Sweden. So I flew into Sweden and then did the Baltics. So I flew to Latvia, Lithuania, went to Ukraine, seen Chernobyl, and from there went to Budapest, worked my way to Italy. And in the course of that summer, I had also studied in London for 6 weeks. So a month before I traveled, and then 2 months after that I also traveled, and ended up going to every country in Europe, and then did some Middle East for 3 weeks. So went to Oman, Bahrain, Qatar, in Dubai, the United Arab Emirates, Lebanon, and then jumped over the Balkans for 2 weeks, and then went to Southeast Asia. So I tried to plan my trip that I'd be in a region of the world for a significant amount of time.
Did you fly everywhere, or what was your transportation, like the series of transportation methods?
So one of the things that the Guinness World Book of Records require is a travel log. So every mode of transport I had done, I have to log it. If I am in a taxi going a mile to my hostel from the main train station, I log that.
Really, even that?
Everything.
Not just crossing borders?
Everything.
Wow. Okay.
So the travel log is I think there's 600 entries so far on this trip.
Whew.
So that includes rickshaws, that includes tuk-tuks, includes jumping on a camel in Egypt, taxis, Ubers, buses, flights. I've had 150 flights, buses from one country to another as a mode of transport. I mean, you name it, I've done it when it comes to transport. But predominantly, to answer the question, it is flying. Flying has been the easy way of entering a country. Not only do you get a stamp, but if you need a visa on arrival, sometimes you can't get it on a border. You gotta get it at the airport, and that's fundamentally in the Middle East. Like going to Qatar, Bahrain, etc. You get visas on arrival typically, and that's all done at the airport.
Okay, so I'm just gonna ask what probably every college student watching this is wondering is, how did you manage to fund everything?
So I worked a job. I self-funded the whole trip. So it's all my hard work.
From past internships and
I worked as a
saved
lifeguard
up.
for 5 years.
Oh, okay.
So 5 years as a lifeguard. I saved up a coin collection since I was 10. I sold that. That was $10,000.
$10,000 worth of coins.
And that was only half my collection. That's not the actual
What?
coins. Silver, that was gold. Fruit
Holy
sets.
crap.
I had about 10 grand, 10, 15 grand from savings from payroll. So that was cool. I worked a FedEx job during finals week in Oakland. I got $1,100 from that. Let's see what else. I took out some student loans. Ended up not using them because I stayed in my fraternity house. That saved $7,000 a year. So that right there was 14 grand. So I had amassed about $30,000 to go on this trip, and I got 100 countries out of it. So traveling's not as expensive as you think. Like $30,000 sounds like a lot, but that's equivalent to a new car. So for me, I have a '94 Lincoln. I don't need a new car. I'm perfectly fine to drive my car that's beat up on the side that has cracks in the windows to go travel the world.
You don't need a new car, but you definitely need a new window.
I do need a new window.
That's dangerous.
I like my car. Baby blue. I love my baby blue.
All right. Okay. So, tips for budget traveling. Budget traveling.
Yeah. So flights in Europe is all Ryanair. So
Ryanair.
how I travel is one backpack. I check it in. Let me rephrase. I have a backpack. I never check it in. I carry it on. I get through customs in a few minutes. I never have the thought of losing my bag. So it's always on me. So that saves me a ton.
What do you
of
keep in your bag?
money. Everything.
Just clothes or?
So I have clothes, I have my camera, my computer, my passports, my documents, sandals. That's about it. And then like toothpaste, cosmetics, things like that. So yeah, I mean it's very like condensed. Like I don't have any luxurious products, like a big jacket, for instance, because I was in summer the entire trip. So like in Europe, I was always in summer. Middle East, Southeast Asia, South America, the Caribbean, that was all summer. So all I had was a cashmere sweater, and that kept me warm. And that's very small, it's very condensed. I had a rain jacket, very small, used it as a pillow on flights. So it's very easy to pack if you have the mindset of going in one bag. It just takes time to think of what you need and what you don't.
Yeah. And you gotta get used to that super Spartan lifestyle too. Just nothing excess. Just what you need, put it on, get going with your day.
Yeah.
Right.
Like everything I had was thought through. Like every single thing in my bag, I've thought it through. Like my pair of pants, those are waterproof. For instance, my boxers, they're waterproof. My socks are the thinnest, lightest weight Nike socks I have. I only wear Lunar Glade 8 Nikes as shoes. And those came out in July.
Quick
and
plug.
The reason for that is I run in every country. So I don't need 2 pairs of shoes.
You've been running in every country too.
I run every country.
Where do you like? How do you handle your accommodation? Have you been just Airbnb, hostels, or host families?
Hostels and hotels. I've only Airbnb'd on the island of Malta with some friends. Besides that, it was all hostels, hotels. In the Caribbean, the average hotel is like $80. So that kind of sucked on my budget. Whereas you compare that to Myanmar, and the hostel was $6 a night, or a hotel in Cambodia was $9 a night. The cheapest and best hostel I ever stayed at was $4.95 in Serbia, in their capital.
$4.95
$4.95
for a night.
for one night.
Can't get a meal for that in the Bay Area.
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, $1 in the Balkans, because Serbia is in the Balkans, $1 or $2 can get you a huge dinner. You can't get that here, as you said.
No way. No way.
So yeah, I spent $300 for 10 countries in the Balkans for 2 weeks, and that covered lodging, transportation, food, and I lived like a king. So $300 for 10 countries in the Balkans is super cheap. You can fly from Oakland to London for like $120 in Norwegian Air. It's a low-cost airline. There's no perks, but you get to London, and from London you jump on Ryanair and go everywhere. I had a flight from London to Bulgaria, 3-hour flight for $21.
$21.
$21.
Do you use any apps that track travel prices, or do you have any recommendations for an app or website or a tour guide or?
Yeah, so Google Flights is amazing.
Google Flights.
You can look at a map of the world from a destination. So let's say I'm going from Buenos Aires. Well, from there, I can then look at what the cost is by a visual map of all the surrounding airports. So that's really, really cool. The other thing is Skyscanner, skyscanner.com, where I can put Buenos Aires and put everywhere, and then from Argentina, I can figure, okay, the cheapest flight is to Sao Paulo, or to Rio de Janeiro, or I can fly to Chile for like $40 to Santiago. So yeah, things like that. Skyscanner is huge. The best thing I've ever used is Maps.me. My advertisement for that is 7 months. I've never asked directions once. It's a free app. It's amazing. So I've downloaded every map in the world, and when I land, I can figure out, okay, how do I get from point A to point B, and that's amazing.
So when you get to each country, what's your agenda? Do you just improvise, or do you kind of have a plan for, I need to see these monuments, these important historic places, or are you just kind of walking around and trying to, take it as it comes?
Well, yeah, I mean, like for myself, logistically, I have the time to figure out how to get to the country. I have the time for visa requirements. I have the time for flights, all beforehand. And that takes a lot of time. Even when I'm traveling, that takes a lot of time. So the only time that I have to think of what I'm going to do in the country is typically on the flight to that country. So like if I'm flying from, for instance, if I'm flying to Rio de Janeiro, right? I know I'm going to be in Rio for 3 days. Well, on that flight, I'm then going to be looking up on the saved documents I have from Rio on what I'm going to do there. Because in every country, I have a saved offline document that shows the top 10 things to do there, and different tourist attractions or museums or what have you. So on that flight, I'm figuring out, okay, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Rio. I'm going to stay on the beach. I already know the hotel or hostel I'm staying at. I just don't have the time to do that beforehand. I mean, figuring out what you're going to do in 100 countries I just don't have that time.
Yeah, no way. I don't think anyone does.
Exactly.
And I hope you don't have that kind of time while you're traveling.
And that's the adventure.
That's good.
Yeah.
Everyone who plans every part of their trip, they don't have much fun.
Exactly. Although there are certain things, like going to Machu Picchu. I knew I wanted to go to Machu Picchu. But what I was going to do in Lima, I had no idea. So like you said, like I played it by ear. So yeah, it's an adventure.
All right, so you just came back from Southeast Asia? Was that the last?
From South America.
South America.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
Latin America is an incredible place.
What's been the craziest adventure? Which country has been the most exciting?
Well, so in South America, there's 2 countries that are English-speaking countries, and you wouldn't think of that. You think of the continent as being Latin America. But Suriname and Guyana are on the top, the northern right part, so the northern eastern part of the continent. And when I was in Suriname, I had 2 flights that were canceled back to back, and that's never happened to me. I've never had a flight canceled in all my travels. So it cost me $900 to book a new flight to go from Suriname to Guyana to Miami to El Salvador to Lima, which took 24 hours of traveling, whereas before it was supposed to just be from Suriname through one of the islands in the Caribbean right to Lima. So that was by far an intense situation. Like it was, for me that was crazy. I would say like behind that, like in Guyana, being able to go to the zoo there and seeing this zoo and compare that to the San Francisco Zoo. I mean that's the Guyana Zoo is basically like 25 animals in these enclosures that are just like third world-esque. Like it's the smallest zoo you could ever think of, and that's the National Zoo.
What kind of do they have? Like, paint us a picture of what this looks like.
Okay, so you walk in, you see the sign that says the Guyana Zoo, and you're like, okay, this is cool. And you walk in, you see some monkeys, you see a cougar. They have snakes. They have this enclosure that's maybe 10 feet by 30 feet. Like it's very small, and there's probably 200 boa constrictors in there.
200 boa constrictors.
I mean, it's insane.
Oh,
like you're
that was a
looking
thing
at
of nightmares.
And I'm terrified of snakes. As you keep walking, there's an otter enclosure that has this pond that's maybe 10 foot by 10 foot, very, very small. Let's see what else. They have an eagle.
One eagle.
They have one eagle. I mean, it's like you think of this like a city zoo in America, like a very, very small city zoo, but that's their national zoo. Like that's their zoo for the country, and you can't compare that to San Francisco zoos or Oakland Zoo.
Right, you'd be wrong to even try to start comparing like you shouldn't be comparing to your home country when you're visiting these new countries, you know.
Exactly.
So
it's cool to get the perspective though of what they're accustomed to compared to what we are. And if you've never been to Guyana, you would never have seen that, or seen how the locals interact with each other, or seen what the priorities of their country is, or how their parliament is. Like, for instance, in front of the parliament in Guyana, there's a sound system that shows live all the debates that go inside. And because a lot of people don't have TVs, there's 50, 60 people that stand outside of the parliament watching this TV and seeing the debates that happen there, whereas we're accustomed to seeing it on YouTube. Like, there's no...
they need to have that in America.
Yeah.
Just in front of the Capitol building.
Yeah, you go to DC, you can't see that. You gotta go to C-SPAN, which we're used to because you got a phone. A lot of people there just don't have that ability. So you have older people that want to know what's going on, so they're standing in front of the parliament and they're watching it live. So things like that was really, really interesting.
What have you noticed as a commonality among all these different cultures? I mean, you've experienced so many different cultures in such a short amount of time.
Yeah.
And like most of these cultures that you get to experience are 2-3 days at a time, right?
Sure.
So from what you can gather from such a short amount of time, what have you noticed is kind of common among all these people?
Well, so I'd say one aspect is if you have a focus of being in a country for 16 hours, then you can see a week's worth in that country within that day. So for instance, if I'm going to Brussels and I have, let's say 1 day in Brussels, for instance, then I'm going to wake up at 6 in the morning and either go on a jog to wake myself up or, go right at it, where I'm going to go to a museum, I'm going to meet people, I'm going to see as much as I can during the daylight. Whereas a lot of people get tired if they go out to one or two things, they're going to come back to the hotel, they're going to relax a little bit. For myself, I don't need to do that. Like, I'm going the entire day. And the next day, typically, I'll then jump on a flight that evening. So I get 2 full days in a country. And that's a lot of time. Like, you can get a lot done in 2 days. For instance, I was in Berlin for 4 days, and I could have got the same amount of Berlin in the same amount I could in 2 days. I just took it more at ease. And whereas in Cambodia I was there for a week, in Laos I was there for a week, in Iraq I was there for a week. So it really depends. Like, I had to determine, okay, where do I want to stay longer at? And a lot of that determination came from flights, the cheapest flights.
All right, let's take it a step back. You mentioned Iraq.
Yeah.
Tell us everything about Iraq. What did you do? How did you get there? Why were you there? What did you see?
So I went to Kurdistan, which is the northern part of Iraq. It's an autonomous region, and they're supported by the United States. So when you land in Erbil, which is their capital, you don't need to get a visa because Americans support their Kurdistan government. So from leaving the airport, there's 3 or 4 checkpoints you go through. But then after that, you see American flags everywhere, which is really peculiar for Iraq.
American flags in Iraq.
Yeah, because we pay for their military. We support their country. They love Americans. Kurdistan wouldn't be an autonomous region if it wasn't for the United States.
I see.
So when we toppled Saddam Hussein, the people that benefited the most were the Kurds, which before were an isolated people that was targeted from the regime. So Kurdistan created their autonomous region in the northern part, and the United States was the one that really supported that area. So when I landed in Erbil, I was very surprised to see American flags. The first morning when I woke up at like 4:30 in the morning. It was already sunlight. I go across the street to the store. It was closed, but there was this guy sweeping outside. So he knew a little English, and I said, "Are you open?" And he said, "Where are you from?" I said, "San Francisco." And he said, "Oh, you're American. Come on in." So he opens the door for me, and I grab some biscuits and a Coke, and I pull out my wallet to pay, and he said, "Absolutely not. You're an American. Thank you for what you did. It's on the house. It's for you." And I was just really perplexed, sitting there as an American with all that we've done into Iraq with 10 years of war, but yet this person was extremely grateful because of what we did for the Kurdistan region. And that was amazing. And then several days after that, I jumped in a military caravan, went to the front lines, see the troops.
Casually.
Yeah, I had a whole armed escort. There was 10 armed guards that were with me the entire time. I had a bulletproof vest. I was working as a press journalist.
You were working as a press journalist.
Yeah, so
how did that work out? How did you convince them that was the truth?
Well, so I got to interview a general that was there, and all that material I'm going to write within my blog. And one thing that the Kurdistan military is all about is they want to hear American journalists going there and being able to articulate what they're going through to get support from the homeland, to get support from the Americans. So they have a lot of journalists that go out there, but you have to have contacts to be able to get to the front lines. And for me, I was able to find a fixer on a Facebook page after a month and a half of research, contacted him over the phone. He answered the phone back in May. We had the arrangement to go to Syria as well as Iraq. But when it came time to go in there in August, the Syrian border was closed, so I just went to the front lines in Iraq, where I was 3 kilometers away from Mosul, which has now been taken over from the Iraqi military, where before it was all ISIS. I saw an ISIS flag in the distance. That was spooky as hell. So it was interesting. It was interesting to get a perspective of what a war zone actually is. And having the knowledge that some of these troops that I'm with, they're most likely going to be seeing combat in the next few months, which is what they did. They did see combat, and hundreds have been killed, and tens of thousands are now civilians, or civilians that have been targeted, and there's over 1 million refugees now. So it's kind of crazy how 4 months ago I was there, and now there's a whole situation from refugees and all the ongoing offensives that have been going on to take over Mosul. So yeah, just one of the experiences of the journey.
Did you end up going to Syria at all?
I've not been to Syria. I was supposed to go to a place called Rojava, which is the Kurdistan part of Syria. The Kurds have 4 different areas. You have Iraqi Kurds, you have the Syrian Kurds, the Turkish Kurds, and the Iranian Kurds. And the Syrian Kurds are separate from the Iraqis, but when I was supposed to go, they had closed off the border to journalists. So unfortunately, I've not been to Syria as of yet, but the plan is hopefully this summer or the fall to be able to go there.
Wait, so how much time do you have to do the record?
So right now I have about a year and a half left. My goal is to be done by November. I'm on track to do that. The 2 obstacles I have is financials, so I'm looking for a sponsor to help me on that. And then the other main hurdle is visas, getting permission from countries to go. And that takes a lot of time, that takes a lot of logistics. When you apply for a visa, you have to have your flights booked. For me, when I'm logistically planning out 10 countries, I then have to plan 10 countries when it comes to flights to fit in Mozambique, for instance, which requires a visa beforehand. Well, I don't know what day I'm going to go to Mozambique unless I plan out South Africa, unless I plan out Swaziland, unless I plan out Zambia and Zimbabwe to figure out what fits perfectly to go there. And then from Mozambique, I go back to Johannesburg, and then from Johannesburg, where do I fly from there? And that's one of the capitals. There's 3 capitals in South Africa. That's near to one of the capitals of Pristina. So yeah, all that requires logistical planning. That takes hours and hours. I love it. You get to plan it out and then go there, and it's pretty cool.
All right, hear that, ladies and gentlemen. If you want to follow along with Indy for the next year and a half, or probably sooner than that, year and a half. Quick plug for your blog. You want to just say whatever you ended up.
The name of the trip is Odyssey 196. So if you go to odyssey196.com, that's my blog. I'm also on Instagram, Odyssey_196, as well as Facebook. So you can see all the Flickr photos and such like that on my blog, as well as updates on where I am around the world. And follow me on Instagram, see me on YouTube. I'll be posting some videos up soon. And follow my journey as I accomplish and attempt to become the youngest and fastest to travel the world to every country.
All right, but we're not going to end here because I told you to hold that story about Burma. While you were in Myanmar, there was a lady.
Yeah, so one of the big things with traveling is immunizations, getting vaccinations. And for me, I've had to get 25 vaccinations when I've been traveling, one of which is rabies. So rabies is a 3-trial vaccination. And for me, if I get bit by a dog or a monkey, for instance, I have to seek medical assistance within 3 days, or I can get rabies. So this woman I met in Burma, she's the nicest woman in the world, and she was traveling a month before in India. Well, it turns out for her, she got bitten by a monkey. And for me, I've been lucky. I've not gotten bitten by anything. I've seen monkeys, I've seen raccoons, I've seen some crazy things, but I've not gotten bit. But she was unlucky and she got bit by this monkey. And so she had a horrible ordeal because she was a day's trip away from New Delhi. So she had to pay as much as she could to get a drive her nonstop to New Delhi. And when she was in New Delhi, she couldn't find anyone that had this rabies vaccine. So what she had to do is she had to go to the American hospital there, and they didn't have it, but the local hospital in New Delhi did. So long story short, what she had to do is go there to get this rabies vaccine, but they wouldn't give it to her with a new vaccine, with a new needle. They wanted to use a previous needle. So she
Wait, they want to reuse a new needle.
Yeah, in India there's a shortage with medical supplies, so they reuse needles. It's no big deal in India. For us, there's no way. So she pulls out everything she had. She pulls out dollars, pounds, euros, like everything in her pocket, Indian rupees, and they finally got her a new needle. She got the rabies vaccine, but she got it an hour before the timeline was done. So an hour later, she would have been after the period that you have to get the vaccine in, and that is pretty deadly at that, or could be deadly. So that was really an eye-opener for me, because I heard this story, and we were traveling for 2 days in Burma, also known Myanmar. In Myanmar, we call it Burma. So that was like, whoa, like what happens if that happens to me? And throughout the trip from there, for the next few months, that has always been in the back of my mind. Like, what do I do if I get bit by something? What do I do if I get a tick? What do I do if I get sick? So having all those backup plans in the back of your mind is, like, I think it's critical. But also just going with the flow. Like
Go with the flow.
Yeah, like in Laos, I got food poisoning. I got food poisoning in Burma. I went to a French clinic in Laos. I had no idea this French clinic existed until I was sick and looked online. It was like, oh, I can actually go there. My backup would have been jumping on a flight to Bangkok and going seeking medical help there in an American hospital. I got pink eye in Brazil, where I had to seek medical help as well. So that's all part of the journey. You know, that's all part of the experience of travel.
25 vaccines, though, that seems like a lot to keep track of.
I've gotten everything around the world. The rabies, the Ticovac, yellow fever, there's just polio, you name it, and I have it. And that's just because there's certain areas of the world that are, you know, more deadly than others, and I wanted to be prepared if I was going to every country to ensure that I did not attract something that otherwise would have been preventable. Because some shots are not available in the US, so I had to travel to London to get some of these shots as well, just because they're, you know, available in the US, in the EU, and not available in the US. So all that is part of the planning as well, which is kind of cool. But as I said, it takes a ton of time. So.
What if you had to stop in any of these countries that you've been to so far and actually settle down, where would that be?
Well, I love Phnom Penh in Cambodia.
Phnom Penh.
Yeah, that's their capital. Cambodia has tens of thousands of expatriates, and what I mean by that is there's tens of thousands of people that are from Britain, from the United States, from Europe, that all speak English. And there's a lot of westernized stores there, and there's a lot of westernized culture there within Phnom Penh, coupled with the Asian culture of Cambodia. So like, there was a lot of times that I would go to a coffee place, and I would go inside and it felt like I was in Berkeley. It felt like I was in San Francisco. And then I'd walk outside and walk in the street, and then I was in Cambodia. And I really liked that. That was really cool. I would say that I could definitely say that there's experiences that otherwise would not have in the States that are different around the world. Like, for instance, Amsterdam, there's so much marijuana that's, of course, now legal in California, but you can get the most craziest different types of weed that's built into ice cream or what have you. And I would have never thought that unless I was in Amsterdam and just seen it with my own eyes. You know, like, there's one thing is reading a blog online. There's another thing of actually experiencing it in person. So yeah, I mean, Cambodia obviously is interesting. I did not experience that, however. It just requires me to go back.
You got to go back. Thailand as well is
Thailand's
incredible.
an amazing place. I was there when the king passed away, so it was kind of down. But it was cool to, like.
Oh, that must have been.
Well, it was cool to pay my respects and see the Thai people and how much devotion and connection they had with their king.
Yeah. So for the people that haven't been to Thailand, the respect for the monarchy is so great. Before you watch a movie, or when we used to go for like sports tournaments, before every game you'd have to stand for the national anthem, even if you're not a citizen. So there are places like this around the world still. And as an American, as someone from a developed country, it's actually hard to grasp that kind of concept, that there are a lot of areas where the monarchy is actually a really strong power. It's not like the British monarchy, and people almost worship them like gods.
Well, in Britain, one of my friends, Simon, one of our brothers in our fraternity, he had an interesting saying that the Queen is like a dog. She's part of the family, but has no rights, has no privileges. Right?
And on that note,
but that's totally different than if you're looking, as you said, looking at Cambodia. You can't insult the king of Cambodia. You go to jail for 15 years. In England, you have the ability to speak your mind. In America, we can speak our mind against politics. But as you said, there's, I think, 16 monarchies still in the world today, and the Middle East has a lot of kings and sultans, and you look at Southeast Asia, and Cambodia has a monarchy, and the Kingdom of Thailand, and it's interesting. Like, we never really think about that in America.
Definitely don't.
But around the world, there is still a significant amount of royalty that is not symbolic, but actually is embedded within their culture, such as what we're seeing in Southeast Asia.
What do you think about that? Like, do you think that could translate in America?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not.
I mean, we beat the king in '76, or '81. We're like, but we declared our independence. I would say that one of the key things that I have seen is the Commonwealth, which is really weird for Britain. There's this Commonwealth that is of countries that used to be part of the Kingdom of Britain, the United Kingdom. And for instance, I was in Belize, and in Belize, their money has the Queen of England on it. and they've been their own country for 30 plus years. And I was really intrigued. I asked probably 20 people, why do you still have the Queen of England on your currency? And nobody under the age of 30 could answer the question. No one had any idea. Even those that were older, they had no clue on why the Queen was still there. Whereas for us, it would be a crazy thought that in the 1700s, we'd have the King of England on our currency after we separated from Britain. But yet there's 40 plus countries around the world that still has the Queen as their head of state, that still has the Queen on their money. So it is kind of crazy to see that. From the Caribbean islands to Belize to Australia to Canada, all these countries still recognize the Queen, even though the separation of power is much different than that of let's say, Cambodia or Thailand.
yeah, that is actually really difficult for me to come to terms with, is these ex-colonies of the imperialistic countries. As much as they try to push the fact that they have given their independence to these countries, they really haven't in a lot of ways. And I was talking to my friend from the Democratic Republic of Congo, and he recommended a documentary called French Africa.
Mm-hmm.
So apparently, I didn't realize this, but after the French gave independence to countries like Ivory Coast, part of the terms of that independence was a tax that they have to pay on a yearly basis.
Mm-hmm.
And if you really do notice, France doesn't have so many natural resources, and yet some of the biggest companies in France are energy companies. Now, that doesn't take a lot of dots to connect to realize that's a very Bay Area mistake. We try to conserve energy, and also move around, right? Physical activity. Where was I? Yeah, so... And many, many other examples of that, like the Democratic Republic of Congo. It's the biggest exporter of, I always forget the name of that substance. Tantalana. It's a mineral, it's a metal, it's a precious metal where the Democratic Republic has 60, Democratic Republic of Congo has 60% of the entire world's reserves. And you need this material to build chips or whatever sensors you need. All this technology, this iPhones, this MacBook, all requires that, and it all requires exploitation of the resources of this one country that holds most of those reserves. And we don't think about it, but the more you think about the supply chain of how we get these things, the more you realize that colonialism hasn't really quite ended. It's just been relabeled and disguised much better.
Well, I think it's a different approach today. I mean, we have a globalized society where the objectives is you put raw materials on a globalized marketplace, and countries that need that will then buy it. That money is then transferred to that country that originated the raw materials, and they're able to buy other things from other countries. So within Africa, when you got 60% of your materials going to China, China's then going to be able to provide streets and highways and such like that to that country, which is a very complicated globalized society. So countries don't need to go into war with one another. The French don't have to control the Ivory Coast, but on a monetarily globalized level, their companies still can. So it's just a different world that we live in, and when you travel and you see it, it's pretty fascinating. And the French and the English, as well as the Danish and the Norwegians, they still have colonies around the world. For instance, the French have, I believe, 48 territories around the world that are part of theirs. It's owned by them. French Guyana in South America, that's owned by them. The English have Caribbean islands. That's owned by the British. So I don't think colonies have gone anywhere. I think they've gone much less than they have in the 20th century with all the independent countries that are originating. But they still have a significant hold on countries around the world. Same thing with the French, which is really fascinating. Something we don't really think of.
Yeah. All right, that was Injured Nelson. Thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me watch it.
And we're done.
Yeah.
Whew. That went by really fast, right?
Well, no.
It was a lot, like
What time is it?
10 past 6.
Sweet. We didn't get kicked out. That's nice.
Been an hour. Full hour.